You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello, please let me see your ticket stubs for the double-edged double bill. This week, Chucky will curse at your child's play. Each week, Adam Thomas and Thomas Mariani will come to the table to discuss the randomly selected yin and yang of a double feature. Then, both will have to pick a number between 1 and 10 in order to seal their fates for the next episode. One will have 2 good movies, the other 2 bad ones. Let the chaos begin. I'm Thomas Mariani, and I'm your friend to the end.
And I'm Adam Thomas, and I got nothing witty for this one, which is surprising because it's sort of a witty franchise. But
Well, I mean, it's because you know you don't fuck with the Chuck.
That's true. You do not fuck with the Chuck.
100% true.
Unless you're Justin Whalen for some reason.
We'll talk about Mr. Whalen in a second. But welcome, everybody, to the Double-Edged Double Bill, where every week we cover a randomly selected good and bad feature based around a topic that we decide. And we're still in the middle of October. We love doing sort of horror-themed episodes. Adam and I are big horror fans. And we like to do a franchise, at least one franchise, every October as well. And the big horror franchise we're doing this year, in honor of the very day that this comes out, will be the day that the new Chucky TV series is on Sci-Fi and USA, apparently. It's a weird, double thing. I'm not sure. But point is, we'll be talking about the Child's Play franchise, which I would say of, the sort of big guys you got in the 80s, where you got, your Nightmare on Elm Streets, your Friday the 13th, your Halloween, which obviously started in the 70s, technically. A lot of those sort of big series that came out around that time. Chucky is one of those where, I think as a sort of horror icon, he's respected, but he's put down compared to those other icons in a way that I feel is maybe a bit unfair.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. I think Chucky and Pinhead both sort of fit right in that category, which is really weird because even when you see the posters or the silly signs that they make where it's, them doing mugshots or sitting there drinking, playing cards like the dog.
I 100% have that t-shirt, by the way, that I was wearing earlier today.
Yeah. But it's always Jason, Freddy, Leatherface, and Ghostface. For some reason, Chucky and Pinhead are usually never included. And I kind of don't get why, especially with Chucky and Child's Play, because I'd argue, even though he's not necessarily my favorite of them all, out of 5 movies that were theatrically released and then 2 on straight to video and now a series, he's probably one of the most successful ones.
Yes, I would probably agree with that. Since 1988, when Tom Holland made the first Child's Play, I would argue he's become a figure that's, at least depending on which horror fan you talk to, is respected. I think mainly because an innate fear of sort of toys coming to life is a big thing. I remember when I was a kid, the ones that scared me the most were probably Nightmare on Elm Street, just because Freddy's gonna get me in my dreams. I can't control that. That's upsetting. Or Child's Play, only because I was such a huge Toy Story fan as a kid, and I loved the idea of my toys come to life when I'm gone. And then just the concept being introduced to me as a kid of hey, they could come to life and maybe they want to hurt you or do worse to you. Really screwed me up. I think screwed up a lot of kids around my age. Even Adam, you were around when the first Child's Play came out, and you were a young kid at that point. Was that fear palpable?
Yeah. No. And I know that sounds crazy, but it was something that never really scared me. The idea of little dolls or small things never scared me. But I know this sounds crazy, but I was always a taller kid. So little things didn't intimidate me too much. So for the idea of Chucky coming after me, I would just pick him up and throw him out the window. What's he going to do to me? So for some reason, maybe that's because I was bullied a lot when I was a kid. So it's kind of the kids at school are mean to me, but these little toys, I rule over them with an iron fist. So it's it just never really intimidated me, man.
Is that maybe why when we were doing our picking at the end of last episode for these 2 films, you were a bit dismissive, as it were, saying, quote unquote, that you really want to watch these, Thomas, because you love to expose yourself to horrible garbage?
Yeah, I was a bit dismissive. No, the thing is, I've always been sort of dismissive of this franchise. I was never a fan of the first movie, really, probably because I never found it scary. So it never clicked as me as being horror or horrific. I almost found it kind of kitschy and campy, and it is fun, especially in the sort of the later movies. But it's just, eh, it never did it for me, man. I think Brad Dourif's great. I think the vocal performance has always been solid. I think the visual effects have pretty much always been solid. It's just, I don't know, never connected with me.
I mean, I remember when I was younger, I think it's maybe because I had such a fascination with, as we've talked about previously, like puppets and Jim Henson stuff, that Chucky was like fascinating to me, even though I was scared by him. I think it also didn't help that I have a weird situation where around the time when I was a kid, this is going to be a rare Thomas references a sports thing that happened.
Whoa.
I know.
Whoa.
Whoa. Whoa. Breaking ground on this episode. But at the time when I was a kid, John Gruden was the coach for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. At the time, everyone was like so fascinated with Gruden because when he got angry, he had like his red hair and his like freckles and stuff. He looked like he was making like a Chucky face. So there was like so much bootleg like Bucks merchandise with fucking Chucky like wearing Bucks jerseys and shit when I was a kid. I just saw like at every like sporting goods store and even just like a Walmart. I would see these things. I'd be like terrified. I'd just be like, Jesus Christ, it's there and it's like in my hometown because it's got Buccaneers jerseys. Like I see people wear all the time. It was definitely a weird factor that just ingrained Chucky into my brain from that particular age. But then when I actually got to the movies, I think I would argue Chucky and the Child's Play franchise in general is one of the more consistent slasher franchise series in terms of like of the 8 movies there currently are. I would say there's one outright terrible one, which is one of the ones we're going to be talking about today. All the other ones have at least something interesting to them, even if they're not great.
I would say out of the 8, I would say there's 2 that are pretty much terrible, but that's pretty good for including a remake in there and everything. That 6 of them are pretty solid. Yeah, no, I think it's a solid franchise. I think it builds on its mythologies really well. It's a natural sort of progression as far as the silliness and the character and everything like that, and then it gets brought back. It's just, like I said, it just never connected with me, but I could still watch it and appreciate it for what it is and sort of the iconography of Chucky and things like that. Like, absolutely, I do think he deserves a spot up there. It's funny that you got the Chuck's Buck thing instead of like Kelvin pissing on the Chevy symbol.
Oh, that was also there. There was a lot of that too. That wasn't excluded from my childhood either. But I think also with that, a lot of it has to be credited to the person who has been involved with most of these movies, except for the remake, Don Mancini, who's written like the other 7 movies and directed the last 3 or so. And I think like having that one single voice is also so rare for a horror franchise. Usually like Wes Craven will like came back for like 2 of the several Nightmare on Elm Street sequels, and Sean Cunningham came back for a couple to produce the Friday the 13th movies, shit like that, as opposed to, like, Mancini has really been, like, the father of Chucky in so many ways, and, like, really developing that character, making him survive to where, like, that remake only came out, like, a couple of years ago, as opposed to, like, way before that point, we'd already gotten, like, a Friday remake, Nightmare on Elm Street, all this other stuff. Chucky has just, like, kind of lasted and really evolved with the times.
I think that has, yes, a lot to do with Don Mancini and sort of Don Mancini's own personality and what he's all about. I think he's a very progressive filmmaker as well.
Right, of course, he's also a noted queer voice in especially mainstream horror that we don't get as often. Obviously helped out by, like, as you mentioned, Brad Dourif is so great. My favorite thing about Chucky as a personality is he feels almost kind of like the blue-collar serial killer of those guys. Where, like,
Yes.
You got, like, Leatherface or Jason, they're definitely very rural. And you've got, like, a Freddy who, while he was, like, a janitor or whatever in his previous life, he still at the same time had, like, a highfalutin sensibility about his, like, jokes or whatever. Chucky has this personality where, like, he'll go from maniacal killer to, like, Jersey asshole who's just like, what the fuck's happening? And I love that.
I've worked with Chucky's before, to various factories and stuff like that. 100%. Every factory I've ever worked at, one of the high-low drivers is a Charles Lee Ray, where he's super nice and stuff, but also he'll fly off the end of the handle and just spout expletives and just awful things. 100%.
But they're not killers, at least as far as you know.
Well, as far as I know, I wouldn't be surprised. This is guy Frank. Oh boy.
Well, Frank, if you're listening, please don't come after him. But We're here to talk about two specific films that we picked, like I said at the end of the last episode. We had your bad pick, which was Child's Play 3. And then we had my good pick, which is Curse of Chucky. And we'll have a lot to say about both of these, but we'll get the bad out of the way first and go chronologically first with Child's Play 3.
Left, right, left.
Welcome to Hell on Earth.
You are without a doubt the most pathetic thing I have ever seen.
It couldn't possibly get any worse.
Wrong again, wimp.
Chucky's back. A few years have passed.
No, you're dead. He killed you.
I'm new and improved.
At Kent, we take bedwetters and turn them into men.
Andy, how you've grown.
And this time,
I really gotta get out of this body.
he's looking for a new recruit. Now,
Just think, Chucky's gonna be broke.
Child's Play 3. Look who's stalking.
A haircut ain't regulation, soldier. Regulate this!
Child's Play 3 came out August 30th, 1991. Notably, only 9 months after Child's Play 2 in 1990. It's almost as if this was...
Can you tell?
Are you saying this was a rush production? I couldn't tell at all by how half-assed this movie is. That's something Don Mancini has pointed out, that like he was tasked to start writing this movie even before Child's Play 2 came out. And he was like really also limited by the budget. Like he had a lot of bigger ideas that he would later use in some of the other movies. Like a big thing he wanted to do with this one was multiple Chuckies, and that ended up being axed because of budget. And so he's like, fine, I'll just save that for later, which he would do in Cult of Chucky, a much better film than this one. This one follows our main lead, who is Andy Barclay, who was the kid in the first two movies, played by Alex Vincent, who I want to say for the record is maybe not one of the best child actors ever, but one of the cutest in those first two movies, especially the first one, where he can barely finish fucking lines because he's like out of breath.
Oh, I know.
It's so cute. Just like,
Yep.
Jackie said he was gonna kill me, Bobby. It's so cute.
Yeah, I know. He's got those big brown doe eyes and everything. Yeah, he's adorable.
Yes. But
Justin Whalen's replacement, on the other hand.
right, yeah, Justin Whalen is playing Andy this time because this takes a huge time jump to where Andy was like 8 or so in Child's Play 2 to now he is 16 and off to military school. And it just so happens that Chucky shows up at that military school. He's shipped over there, and he starts causing chaos at this military school. And I referenced earlier the whole thing of, oh, I think there's only one that's outright just like not giving a shit and not that good of the Child's Play movies. Spoiler, it's this one. Yeah. I think this is easily the worst one of the whole franchise.
Man, like I've said it before on the show several times in reference to anything or other films and things like that. This is a cash grab of a movie, man. You could tell this was so rushed, and not a lot of prep went into it. And I'm guessing probably a little bit of exhaustion on Dan Mancini's part and everything. And it's all on the screen. I mean, this is a fucking dumb movie. Even the kills are bad. Like, there's not even good kills in this movie. It's just quick, like, oh, slit his throat, done. And Justin Whalen, you know, not to shit all over him, but I'm going to for a second. He's just such a boring actor in this movie, and I don't give a fuck. It's like following a piece of drywall around, man. You don't care. But then again, none of the characters in this are make you want to follow them, except for maybe like Winterhurst or whatever, because he pulls that Steve Rogers moment at the end. Like, that's funny. But
yes, the nerd character who has an arc of just like, I'm a coward. Well, I'm not going to be a coward by killing myself for everybody.
Jumping on a live grenade. So fucking stupid. It's like they got the idea, hey, we got this military school we can film in it. Write the movie that he's in military school. Okay. Yeah, and let's just do everything you've seen in movies that takes place in military schools. Let's have, like, head cadet be a real jerk. Let's have him play war games. Let's have, you know, one of the guys who really likes to give him haircuts and all this stuff. It's all cliche, stereotype, cliche, boring kills. Done.
I will give credit at least to, you mentioned the haircut thing, Andrew Robinson, who you might recognize from like Hellraiser, as well as the original Dirty Harry, plays the barber at the military school, and he is like almost bordering on like sexual fetish with how much he wants to cut these kids' hair. It's really unnerving.
It's so over the top when he walks through the fucking cafeteria and he's grabbing, hey, Monday, Tuesday, let it go Wednesday. Like, get the fuck out.
But he has like some life in him, as opposed to like everyone else is just so running through the motions.
Yeah, I'd argue he's the only one in the whole cast.
Yeah, but even then, you can tell like with that particular character, it has like to display just how like kind of poorly baked this movie is in general. Is like him doing the whole "presto, you're bald" thing several times, just so we can have Chucky do the worst like one-liner in one of these movies of many in this one. Of like a serial killer one-liner, which is like "presto, you're dead," when he like cuts his neck. Which is what is that? It's nothing.
It's literally nothing. And then just where the nerd kid discovers it and doesn't say anything. And then he goes up there and Andy's like, "Oh, what's wrong? You saw something." "No, I didn't. I don't want to talk about it." Why? For the last fucking 45 minutes, this Andy kid's been trying to convince you this doll is real. Why don't you be like, "Holy fuck, dude, you're right"? Like, I don't understand the logic behind that decision at all. How did Chucky come back?
Well, they have the opening sequence, which I'll admit that like I like the opening credit sequence of this movie of like Chucky kind of reforming, because of the whole thing where like his body from the end of 2 is like put on like the little mechanical like hand thing across like the factory, and some of his blood gets into the vat. So I guess that's how he gets brought back.
Yeah, all right.
I mean,
why not?
Look, to be fair, this series is not the most consistent with like the weird magic of Dembala or whatever the hell it is.
Yeah,
after a certain point, they don't give a shit. Like, that's the least of my problems with, as opposed to like when Chucky does come back. One, the animatronics aren't like bad, but they feel half-assed, especially after Child's Play 2 like did such a massive improvement on the animatronic stuff. And I don't think Brad Dourif's half-assing it either, but he's just given, like we said, just such shitty material with that. Or the whole thing where they're talking about the one kid, the little boy who now Chucky's trying to get into is like a black kid. And he says like, "Hey, Chucky's gonna be a bro." It's just like, oh my god, what is this? What is this?
Yeah, with Tyler.
Yes, Jeremy Silvers as Tyler, the replacement cute kid. Not an uncute kid, but nowhere near like Alex Vincent.
No, he's fine. I just, like I said, the thing is, if this movie had really good kills and good gore or anything like that, I could go with it and sort of follow it, have fun with it. They don't even give you any of that. It's like I said, it's just simple throat slashes and stabbings, basically, and that's about all you get.
Yeah, also one very mean-spirited one where they shoot the Travis Fiennes, like, cadet character with, like, the whole, like, weird, almost, like, really shocking, like, in the middle of the war games, it becomes, like, a fucking school shooting thing, unintentionally. Which just, it felt, like, really weird and mean-spirited, even though, like, that character is, like we mentioned, like, the thinnest version of, like, the Arlie Ermy drill sergeant guy, which is also weird because Travis Fiennes looks like he's only, like, a year older than fucking Andy, which is just like, I don't believe it. I don't believe that he's like this big of a hard ass in the way of like an Arlie Ermy, because he's like a child.
Right, and then to talk about someone who also looks way older than Andy, these really forced to put upon love interest.
Yes, I completely agree with that. Perry Reeves as Kristen was just uncomfortably older, and I think I looked this up that Perry Reeves was like 20
years old.
Yeah, she was 20 when he was like 16 or so. It's especially when they kiss, it's really creepy.
Oh,
yeah,
I know, and it just comes out of left field, and it like there's no point to it. Like, why even go that route with it? It's unnecessary. I could see making Andy sort of like maybe lust after her a little bit or be into her because he's a 16-year-old boy, but for her to just be like, "Nah, I'm gonna take charge and kiss you," it doesn't work at all. And she's fine in it. I don't want to say nobody's committed. You could tell it was a rushed thing. I don't think they had enough time to sort of play around or figure out what their characters were. Everybody's just one note.
Everyone's fairly much on autopilot. Yeah, I think that's a problem. Especially when, like, the few things I'll say I kind of like about this movie. I do kind of like the opening bit involving Chucky killing the good guy doll guy, the
Like
Mr.
the
Sullivan.
CEO,
Yeah, Mr.
whatever.
Sullivan, Peter Haskell, who was in Child's Play 2. So he kills that CEO at the beginning. I think that's a decent sequence. And then also the whole haunted house thing at the very end, where they're at the carnival. Though that just made me realize, like, why didn't this story revolve around Chucky at like a traveling carnival?
Yeah, what the fuck?
That would make way more
That'd work
sense.
great.
He would disguise himself as part of like the fucking ski shooting or whatever as a prize, and they would have gone to like Andy's neighborhood or whatever, and he would have like been there, and it would have been like the fun house, but with fucking Chucky running around all these cheap ass carnival rides.
Yeah, or even the bit from like Seed of Chucky at the beginning. Maybe you'd have hooked up with some fucking grease ball and done a ventriloquist act.
Right, something like that. Yeah, that would have been a much more fun movie.
That's what I said. It feels like they had the location that they could use, so they pigeonholed it to be a military school thing. That's the only excuse for me. Because other than that, it's completely unnecessary.
Yeah, it just felt like they were really unconfident with Child's Play at this point as a franchise. So they're just like, oh, we gotta rush out another one. As opposed to like, no, you guys took like 2 years between the original and Child's Play 2, and that worked out great. So why don't you just do the same fucking thing?
It's so funny, but that is not uncommon with, horror franchises especially. Look at the turnaround between Nightmare 5 and 6.
Or like Halloween 4 and 5 was also very similar.
Yeah, like there were literally posters for Part 5 before Part 4 even premiered. You know what I mean? Like coming this month, and you're like, holy fuck. So, it's not uncommon, but the thing is, apparently nobody learns from it, because has anybody seen those ones? None of them are good.
No,
when you rush this shit.
Especially when, like, I think that's why I would still say this is easily the worst one. It's just because, like, even when a lot of people would say Seed is, like, the worst, and I rewatched all these movies in preparation for this episode, I still don't think Seed is quite a good movie, but Seed is not unambitious, and at least has, like, some interesting, especially ahead of its time things, with, like, gender, with, like, the Glenda character. That makes it miles ahead of this movie.
Oh, I gotta agree with you. See, before I rewatched most of these, I would have said Seed 100% over this one. But after going back and rewatching them, I went back and I've watched, well, all of them except for the remake. This one is easily the worst. I agree with you. 5 is not a good movie. Seed is no good, but it's trying, man. It's shooting for the moon in every way. Like trying to do the comedy, the meta thing, the gender thing, all of that stuff. Like it's trying a bunch of shit, just none of it really lands. Whereas this one isn't trying it at all.
For the record, I'm more just like it's an uneven movie as opposed to an outright bad movie with Seed. Hashtag get Glenn and or Glenda back into the Child's Play TV show. I want it. I legitimately
They will.
Want them. Yeah.
I think they will.
Look, I would want that over like the references to Kent that show up in some of these later movies. Where it's like, does anyone care? Is anyone gonna care? Fucking like one of the like, oh, Perry Reeves is back, everybody.
Right. Well, but to be fair, the only callbacks that I even noticed to Kent, for the most part, is a sweater in a frame.
Right. But I'm just saying, like, I don't think they need to do, like, what they're doing with, like, the Kyle character from Child's Play 2 coming back, or some of the other, like, back and forth references they've had to the other movies. This is the one you can pretty much skip. I think it's because, like, another weird thing revisiting these movies is how much, like, Mancini likes to play with, like, doing sort of couplet movies with, like, the writing, where it's just, like, 1 and 2 feel of a piece, and then Bride and Seed feel of a piece, and then Curse and Cult feel of a piece. He likes to kind of take a bit of a break and write like 2 movies basically that kind of like complement each other and show where Chucky is at this point in this particular decade or whatever he's doing. And I think that is like a much smarter idea than as opposed to 3 just feels like it sticks out like a sore thumb and has no real like purpose in the series at all.
Yeah, I'd say that's incredibly accurate, especially after rewatching. I know people who are fans of this one, not like a lot of people, but I do know of people who really sort of defend this one for some reason. And, that's fine. If you like it, that's cool. But I think, I never really was able to place how I felt about it until you said exactly what you just said. I think it feels completely out of place and sort of off on its own compared to the entirety of the rest of the franchise. And it also, I think, has a lot to do, if you watch them in entirety, where come 6 and 7, that it's the original actor back as Andy.
Right.
All right. It's Child's Play. It's horror. I get they pump them out because people want to see them, and they did make big money at the box office. But, this is definitely one of those ones, like I said, not only does it feel like a cash grab, but it also feels soulless, where it feels like, put it out so we could print it on T-shirts. Don Mancini feels like his hands were tied behind his back and really, like, taken away from him. Whether that's true or not, I'm not 100% sure, but this just feels like no care was given behind any bit of it.
Yeah, I believe like he said that also Jack Bender, who directed this movie, has said as much, that he felt kind of like really handled by the studio in the way of just like trying to rush this out. And I think another big part of that, as you mentioned, like the Andy character, what I love about these Child's Play movies is how much like they usually care as much about like the human protagonist as much as they do about like the doll characters. There are some exceptions, like say Katherine Heigl and what's his face in Bride of Chucky, who are like the worst part of that movie. And every time they're around, like, I really hate them. Just like, get back to Tiffany and fucking Chucky doing fun shit. For the love of God. For the most part, Mancini knows how, like, hey, look, in horror franchises, I think you should care as much about, like, the villain, especially as we keep going forward and making him more of a hero, as much as the actual human characters we've had. That's why when, like, Andy shows up in those later movies, it doesn't feel as much like, oh, this is a cash grab, like a nostalgia bomb kind of thing. Like, oh, remember Andy? It's like, oh, no, we're actually caring about Andy at this point. It's like, it's not just, look, it's Andy. It's, oh, look, it's Andy, and he's totally fucked up by his past childhood and all this shit. As opposed to, like, with this movie, like, you wouldn't be able to tell that Justin Whalen has had much of any issue with Chucky. Like, when he shows up, just like, oh no, it's Chucky. There's no, like, emotional investment in, oh my god, it's this killer doll who terrorized me and drove me away from my mother.
Killed my babysitter, tried to, kill me, so possess me several times, attacked my mother, killed kids at the school I was going to, everything. Nothing. Yeah, he's just like, oh, is that the same one, I wonder? Like, Jesus, man. Like, for sure. Like, and then it's like the cat and mouse sort of game they try to set up inside the school where, Chucky could be hiding anywhere and we don't know. Don't listen to him, Tyler, blah, blah. Nah, man. You get off your ass and you find that fucking doll. Like, fuck that school. Find that doll. That thing's gonna kill you, man.
Also, at like a huge military school, it seems like the place where it would be least likely for Chucky to be able to like walk around unnoticed by anybody.
100%. You're telling me none of these fucking like MPs or generals or anything are gonna see this doll and be like, why does this thing keep fucking popping around? They just keep trying to throw it away, and that's basically it. Like, it's just so dumb.
Honestly, my favorite kill is kind of like referencing that, where like the main guy at the military school, like the headmaster, finds Chucky in his office and he dies from a heart attack. And Chucky's like, oh, you gotta be fucking kidding me. Is this what's happening now?
That's the funniest bit. Like, that bit felt like that's what was coming in the Child's Play franchise.
Mm-hmm.
Where he sort of gets, really disappointed because he can't do the kill and stuff like that. Like, that was the most Chucky bit to me, that one scene.
Right, because even, I would argue, like, another big thing that I think worked for Child's Play, a transition into comedy, unlike some of the other slasher franchises, is, like, the humor I felt was always kind of there, even in the original movie. There's enough humorous bits of just, like, acknowledging, like, oh, this doll is walking around and shit like that, as opposed to here, most of the jokes, besides, like, that bit that's kind of funny, come in the form of these one-liners like, don't fuck with the Chuck, or what can I say, you can't keep a good guy down. All these things that, like, it feels like Brad Dourif's recording that for, like, the toy as opposed to the character in the movie.
No, I agree. It's very slappily written, this one. Like I said, Chucky, it's Chucky, because it's Brad Dourif's voice, and it's the good guy doll and stuff. Like, it is Chucky, but it's like a shell of Chucky.
Yeah, shell of Chucky, my favorite entry in the franchise. Yeah. I will say, though, shout out to, I think this is one of the better Chucky deaths in the franchise, where he always dies at the end. Him getting thrown to that fucking giant fan, I think is kind of like a cool death. Particularly, like, it's very sure that, like, I don't know if you're going to be able to, like, come back from this, dude. It's, I get why it took, like, 7 years for you to come back after this.
Oh, I agree with you. And I do like it, too, because it's very sudden as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not this big, long, drawn-out thing. Now, Andy just fucking shoots his arm off and then basically cuts his hand off and he falls into this fucking thing. Like, it's not this big contraption that has to be used or none of the voodoo stuff or none of that. He just falls into a giant fucking turbine and gets destroyed.
During this big, like, Halloween haunted house thing at the carnival, which looks cool. I like the production design stuff.
The best one I've ever seen. I've been to those fucking type of rides at carnivals. They suck ass.
That's what I was about to say. Like, it looks far too expensive. This looks like a big, elaborate, like, thing you would see at, like, at least a Six Flags as opposed to, like, a traveling carnival. Where it'd just be like, oh, here's a wall with some, like, lightning on it, and then a skeleton pops out of, like, a really bad makeshift coffin. As opposed to, like, this is gigantic. Like, a carnival barker isn't gonna, like, fucking be so committed, like, oh, you know what, this scythe on this Grim Reaper, it has to be super sharp so it can cut this fucking doll's face.
Yeah, dude, it looks like the fucking T-Rex ride from the end of Martin Short's Clifford.
100%.
Like, this has got some production value.
I was waiting to see Charles Grodin just like, we're gonna keep going faster and faster on this ride. Clifford, a movie we must talk about on the show at some point.
Oh, good Lord.
Clifford is fascinating. But anyway, we're getting too far off the beaten path. So let's do, I guess, some final thoughts then on Child's Play 3. Adam, final thoughts.
If you watch the franchise as a whole, this one clearly is out of place for several reasons. Not even just the casting, the tone of it, the kills, the laziness of the whole thing. I would say if you are a franchise completionist, you could even skip this one and not miss a beat from 2 to 4. Like this, it's unnecessary. Nothing happens in this movie other than the fact that there's a Kent sweatshirt in like the 6th movie that makes a difference. Other than that, it doesn't matter.
And even then, just be like, oh, he went to military school at some point, I guess.
Yeah.
Sure, that explains why he's, like, proficient with weapons, or whatever, sure. That explains enough about that. And yeah, I completely agree that if you're maybe inclined to watch these movies, which most of them are on Peacock, as when we were recording this, except for the first one because of the MGM weird rights thing, I guess. I would definitely say if you're in a crunch where it's just like, oh, I have to skip one of these, this is easily the one to skip. There is not much you're missing. If you want to skip this particular one, it's lazy, it feels very rushed, it feels like it doesn't have much empathy for the characters as much as the other ones do, down to like, Andy has like such a sad ending with this movie where it's just like, oh, he's gonna get dragged off by the cops, and he has no proof that like Chucky did any of this. Where was that reference in some of these other movies? Like, oh, hey, yeah, Chucky tried to kill me in military school and I was in prison for like 10 years. Or whatever.
I mean, I think they kind of allude to it in the 7th one on the date or whatever. They kind of allude to his entirely checkered past, but yeah, there could have been more.
I mean, they leave it vague enough where it could just be like, oh, when you were 6 and you said a doll murdered your babysitter.
That's true.
But anyway, yeah, Child's Play 3, very bad. Don't even bother if you're crunched for time. But before we get into our next feature, here is a promo for an ESO show you can queue up right after ours.
Have you been searching for that one heavy metal podcast that covers all of your favorite geeky topics as well? Well, look no further. The Metal Geeks Podcast is here to save the day. Whether you are into video games, films, comic books, theme parks, or even, yes, heavy metal, then the Metal Geeks Podcast is a place for you. Check us out on all of your favorite podcasting apps, and we are proud members of the ESO network. Keep it geeky and keep it metal.
And now let's get into our good feature, Curse of Chucky.
Who's it from?
It doesn't say.
You found him.
Chucky's my friend till the end. Hey, wanna play?
Good night, baby. Sweet dreams.
Don't forget Chucky.
It's a doll. What's the worst that can happen, huh? It's time to play.
So, Curse of Chucky came out October 8th, 2013. Obviously, big jump from 1991 when the last movie came out. So, briefly, after that, there was a long break until Bride of Chucky came out in 1998 and kind of relaunched the franchise, made it a bit more comedic. Was a pretty big success. Felt very much like in the wake of Scream. They kind of had to do something a bit different and make it a bit meta, but also just more humorous in general. Made him a lot of money with that. And then Seed of Chucky came out in 2004, which, as we mentioned, is not well liked, was not a big success in 2004, and ended up being the last, as of yet, theatrically released movie in the general continuity, besides, like we mentioned, Child's Play, the remake, came out in 2019. After Seed of Chucky kind of failed, there was a longer break than ever, with like 9 years difference, until eventually we got Curse of Chucky being released straight to video, which, when I heard this was happening, like any horror fan, it was like, oh my god, that's the nadir. Now we're doing a straight to video movie. Chucky's gone downhill, it's going to be the new Hellraiser. nothing good's gonna come from it. I'm assuming, Adam, were you similarly dismissive when you heard this was gonna happen?
1000%. I thought exactly what you just said. It was like, oh, well, I guess Chucky's gone the way of Hellraiser and Leprechaun.
Yeah, Leprechaun's a more apt like comparison. But yeah, so it was just like whatever. It's not gonna really be a thing. And then I had heard this was surprisingly good, but I didn't watch it until around when Cult was coming out, which is when I watched most of these for the first time. Like, aside from the first Child's Play and Bride, which I had seen when I was much younger, I marathoned through these right before Cult came out. And Curse was just like, all right, whatever, we'll see how this is. And this movie surprised the fuck out of me, because it's great.
Mm-hmm. I bought it day and date when it came out because I was a physical media completionist. So I had already had like the little box set that came out, and so I'm like, well, I guess I gotta fucking get this one. It's not gonna be good. I got it, I put it on. I'm like, okay, all right. And then by the end, I'm like, this movie fucking slaps.
You had those hand clap emojis ready.
Yep, 100%. Yeah, this movie's fucking legit, dude. I'd argue this is the first time for me personally that it made it scary, and that has a lot to do with sort of the house and the lighting and everything, and even the slight redesign for Chucky. He's a lot creepier and more sinister looking. Wonderful practical effects, and also the animatronics, but where they specifically have like a little person in the faraway scenes dressed as Chucky. It's super effective, super well done. It's a really good movie, and by putting Fiona Dorff in it, which obviously she's Brad Dourif's daughter, but I know they did that as like a wink, but she's really fucking good, and the fact that she's paraplegic makes it even like more of a threat. Like, oh no, like how's she gonna get away? It's really fucking effective, this whole thing.
Yeah, and I think especially with like Dom Mancini being once again writer but directing as well, the second time since Seed, I am just stunned by the improvement that he managed to have from Seed to this movie. Because Seed definitely feels like it's a first-time director with way too much money, kind of like studio money, just to like do kind of like whatever he can, and it feels messy. Versus this movie, it feels like so confident and so perfectly done. And we were like, this straight-to-video movie looks better than most of the other fucking movies in this franchise.
Absolutely. And it's a stripped-down version. Obviously, probably less budget, but I think the sort of failure of Seed, and also knowing that this one's going to go direct-to-video and probably lesser budget, sort of humbled him a little bit and made him really work to like, oh, I'm going to make this as good as I fucking can. Then I'm going to make this scary again. And I mean, to me, it was 100% a success in that aspect.
Yeah, I think he knows, like, okay, I have the things I'm available, sort of that, like, necessity is some other invention kind of thing. He really took that to heart here, where it's like, okay, I have a few characters, and I have this set. So I'm going to make this set look as good as possible, which it does. I love it. It looks like this weird, almost like gothic, especially the color palette, where it looks so like gray and lifeless. Like, it really sets up the fact like Fiona Dorff's character at the beginning loses her mother in a horrible accident that later turns out to be a Chucky killing. But like, you can tell like the whole house feels like it's sapped of life. And like, she's just so lonely and out of it. And a way where like fits perfectly for her character. And also just in general, like, Chucky doesn't really, there are hints of him doing things, you see, like, little bits and pieces, but he doesn't speak until, like, halfway through the movie, and I didn't quite miss him because I was so enthralled with this family drama. I was genuinely invested, like, all the characters in this movie are great, and I really want to follow them.
Oh, absolutely. I completely agree. And it was so smartly written, especially with the dynamic between the sister, the nanny, and the husband.
Yes.
The whole time you're like, oh, this fucking piece of shit. And then when the ultimate reveal happens, you're like, oh, this is great. Like, it's so good. It's so good. And then, I put a nanny cam on the doll. What a cool idea that was, too. Even if it was set up just for the one scene where they're watching his point of view, very fucking cool. I wanted to follow the whole family. And like you said, just the little bits you get at Chucky with him pouring the rat poison in one of the things of chili. Whose chili is it?
Yes.
It's such a great thing. It's so cool. All of a sudden, the little girl is like, oh, it doesn't feel good. Oh, I don't like it. But then it's like, it's just a little kid who doesn't want to eat. And ultimately, what happens to the fucking person who does get the chili, is brutal. It's so
That's another thing also, is like, this is maybe the goriest movie of this franchise, which is like astonishing.
Yeah.
Just the amount of blood that is used in this movie is stellar. With particular, like you mentioned, sort of the priest character, which I love. Even with that whole dinner sequence, everybody has a bit like that. Like the sister's like, oh, can I get the salts? And some of the other people are like trying to kind of mask the idea that it's not that good. Like, it's such a well done sort of almost like Hitchcock suspense scene, where it's like, we know the bomb's under the table, like that quote of his, and we're just waiting like, oh my god, who's gonna have the poison or whatever. And then the fact that it's like A. Martinez as Father Frank has it, but that doesn't even matter because later he's gonna get decapitated in the worst way. The worst.
He's gonna get decapitated and his hand cut off while it's still holding a rosary.
Oh, but especially that it's like he's still alive when we see him at the car wreck that happens. And the one, like, overzealous cop is like, get that thing off of him. I don't know if I want to make that call. Do it. And he takes it off, and then his, like, neck is just cut when they move that shit, and then it falls over. Like, oh my god.
I know, you almost expect him to be like, tell Meryl I said to swing away.
It's got a bit of those vibes. But yeah, even back to like the family, I really love the use of like not just Fiona Dorff, as you mentioned. Like on paper, it's like, oh, this is like nepotism. She's gonna be like a part of this franchise. Her dad's been a partner for years, but she totally earns it. It doesn't. She is a very talented actress who's able to like really be convincing as like a person who has a disability, but at the same time, it doesn't completely define her character. And people like completely doubt her all the time. Like I love that dynamic with her and Danielle Bisutti, who plays Barb, the sister. Like, that is a constant thing. Like, she's constantly, like, patronizing her sister because, like, oh, you're in the wheelchair, I have to help you out. And that dynamic feels real. It doesn't feel like they don't love each other, but it feels like they genuinely have had this for years, this back and forth. And as that extends, like you mentioned, with, like, that scene where her and fucking Jill kiss is, like, the perfect reveal. It's such a good, like, oh man, this like cliche plot line has been completely turned on its head. And now I'm like, oh, okay, let's see how this goes. Like, I'm invested in this weird soap opera way in fucking the Chucky movie.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And, you know, the thing about Fiona Dorff, just throw it back to that too. I thought the same thing, like, oh, okay, this, like you said, feels like a bit of nepotism and everything. But it just, you know, not to talk about the following film, but once the ultimate thing that happens in the sequel to this one happens, it's kind of brilliant casting choice, just even for that sort of where they take the character. And I would have never expected it while watching this one. So, but that's what made this one really cool too, as far as Fiona Dorff, because she earns every bit of being in this movie. I mean, she might have got her foot in the door because of who her father is, but she's fucking solid as hell in this movie. I'd be hard pressed to pick a weak member of the cast, unless you want to pin it on the little girl because she's a child actor, but even then, she's fine. We as the audience know who's doing this, but the people in the house, it becomes like a murder mystery whodunit. And the whole time we're like, it's the fucking doll! Like, we're right there with Fiona Dorff, like, it's the fucking doll! But everyone else is like, it was you, it was you, it was you.
Right, which in other movies, it could be so tired. Because some of the other, like, especially, like, 3 even does a bit of that, where it's just like, come on, Andy, or whatever. Like, they even, like, the next one, Cult of Chucky, also does that. But I think this is the perfect way to do that, where we firmly say, like, oh no, Chucky's around. Chucky is a person. He can move. We can see that, like, right from, even before that with the rat poison, like, when the little girl discovers him in the bathroom.
Oh, yeah.
Like, you can tell me, like, okay, Chucky is a real presence. He is still, we know he is pulling the strings. But it's just a total case of like, what, did no one see that? No, no one saw that, and now we all completely doubt you. Adds to the tragedy of this character where she's like, she lost her mom, and everyone doubts her because she's in the wheelchair. And now even further, it's just like, oh, are you going crazy now because you think like the doll did it? A thing where it's like, it's not trying to build dumb suspense, it's actually trying to build this character and put her in like this position that we want to see her get out of.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And yes, they do it in the next one. And I'd argue it's not as good as they do it in this one, for lack of a better phrasing. But yeah, it's super solid in this. I love that whole play on the character and the sort of the surrounding side characters too, especially with the husband.
Yes.
I mean, it's so good, you know, and it just his ultimate where he thinks he's figured it out. He's like, why the fuck would you do that? You know, and you're like, oh no, like it, you know, I need you to give me the shot. I need you to do this, please. It just, it's so, the tension. That's the one thing about this movie I'd argue over all of them. It has such a building tense attitude about it. And it's so wrought with tension the whole movie, and it's such a build up, release, build up, release. It does it incredibly well.
Yeah, and I think a big part of it is that, like, everybody, even more, like, on paper, Ian, the Brendan Elliott character, could be just, like, the most stock asshole in any of these movies. But, like, you get from his perspective why he's acting this way. About just, like, have you done something to my daughter and my wife, who I was already on, like, really bad, shaky ground with, and this woman who I wanted to fuck, the babysitter. Like, you can see how, like, even though he's, like, clearly, like, a guy who's kind of an asshole, he still is, like, an actual dimensional human being. Everyone is. Which I think makes it way better. It's the thing where, like, people often give, like, slasher movies the pass of, like, oh, it's a slasher movie. You don't have to have great, compelling characters. That's not that necessary. This movie's just like, oh, no, you can do that. It can still be great. You can also still have awesome kills. Like, we even haven't talked about, like, aside from the priest one, which is stellar, there's so many other great kills. Like, even the way Madeline McConnell as Jill dies with, like, the laptop. So good. So upsetting to see. Or even the Barb's death with, like, the fucking right through the eye, and the build-up even where she, like, unmasks Chucky or whatever. So good.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That whole scene with her in the fucking attic trying to find the daughter is terrifying, because she's holding the killer the whole time. Like, you know it's gonna happen, dude. And yeah, that, I will say, I did not expect when I first saw this, the peeling of the face to show the scarred Chucky and everything. Because until they show, spoiler, Tilly on the screen at the end, I thought this was like a direct sequel to, like, the second or third one. I didn't even know that they were even honoring Bride and Seed in this.
Well, it almost feels like a full reboot in a way where, like, despite some of, like, the ending callbacks that they do, like, I've recommended this to people who just as, like, a jumping point, like, shout out to Sequels show where we've had people on. I recommended Sarah to be like, hey, why don't you watch fucking Curse of Chucky? It's a great one. She's like, are you joshing me, Thomas? Are you sure about that? Mm-hmm. And they were all like, no, this is a great fucking movie. This is a great jumping in point. Like, if you've not seen any of these movies and you want a good jumping in point, I would recommend Curse, and you can kind of go back to the other ones and kind of enrich your enjoyment of Curse. But Curse is, like, a perfect point to, like, jump in on, while still, like, some of these other things happen for the fans at the same time later. That's why it's kind of like the perfect example of, like, a soft reboot of a franchise.
Yeah, I agree. Especially in the fact that while watching this, like you said, it almost will make you want to go back and watch some of the other ones to find out how all this happened and stuff. But it won't detract from your enjoyment of this one. It can only enrich it. And yes, that is the perfect idea for a soft reboot, to where you're going to get new fans invested in the series going forward, and they're going to want to go back and rewatch it. And fans who have been there the whole time are going to get those little Easter eggs and moments for themselves that feel like it's kind of there for the fan base. Yeah, it's totally successful in that.
And we've kind of, like, talked around him a bit, but obviously Chucky himself, Adam, you've kind of mentioned, like, some of the stuff with his appearance and stuff. How did you feel about this redesign, especially? Like, you said this is the first time Chucky's kind of felt scary to you. Why do you feel that with him in particular?
I don't know if it's the way the haircut is. I don't know if it's the more angular nature of the face, especially when he turns. Like, when he first see me, he's still got, like, the round cherub face. But when he turns into full, like, Charles Lee Ray Chucky, it takes on almost, and I thought this when I first saw it, and I don't know if this is accurate, but it's kind of the way I felt. He almost looks like an anime character, with the way the eyes are and the brow and all that stuff. Like, it looks like something completely out of this world, and it works extremely well to me.
Well, I think that's why it works to me, is, like, as a dude who really liked toys as a kid, and especially, like, grew up seeing, like, how certain toys would come back from, like, an earlier generation. It feels like this is, like, the good guy doll that would have been released in 2013 to kind of get both modern kids, but also, like, people who are nostalgic in a way they even reference. With the one guy just like, oh man, the 80s were awesome. I love these good guy dolls. They're great. Like, almost an anti-80s nostalgia movie that this is.
Yeah, that's a really good point, dude. When I was a kid, I had a My Buddy doll, what the good guys are sort of based on. And I want to say they did a reboot of that, but I know I had a My Pet Monster, and they re-released that, and they completely streamlined the whole look of it. And I never really put it together that way, but I think that's 100% accurate. I think what you just said kind of reinforced why it's so out of place and sort of creepy to me, because it is this sort of commercial bastardized version of something that you might have loved as a child.
Which at the same time was also, like, inherently at the time was also crass and commercial and trying to appeal to you. It was just original at the time.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Which I think also even works for, like, the sort of background, because we also get the first time we've seen Charles Lee Ray in one of these movies since the opening of the original movie, which admittingly, the most unintentionally funny stuff is seeing them attempt to make Brad Dourif look like he did in 1988, and he just looks like Tommy Wiseau.
With that fucking wig.
Yup. It's not great. But at the same time, I think what also works is that it gives you a bit more insight into Charles Lee Ray as a character, where before, like, all we saw of him in the earlier movie was him, like, running away, and he's just like, oh, I gotta run away with my getaway driver, which this doesn't quite fit with that, because I don't think he ever referenced Eddie Caputo being his getaway driver to get him out of this. No, but whatever. Instead, we get a bit more about, like, how he seduced the mother of the family, the Pierce family, after a certain point, and then, like, kidnapped her while she was pregnant with the Nika character. And it's just, like, this unsettling scene where he, like, talks to her, and it's mostly black and white except for, like, the sunflowers, which is a great look. That visual looks so stunning. We see Charles Lee Ray as, like, oh, instead of just a blue-collar criminal, it's just, like, also he was, like, a serial killer with obsessive issues, which I think makes it all the more creepy.
Yeah, and it makes it so much more just disturbing and creepy, the fact that you've been following Nika, this girl who's, handicapped and everything, and then come to find out it's his fault too.
Yeah.
Like, because he stabbed the mother and the good God. Like, you're like, oh, fuck no. Yeah, it's, no, that's the thing. They made him scary again, be it the Charles E. Ray or the Chucky doll, even though, yes, the wig looks ridiculous. But the way he's talking to her when she's sort of almost crucified down in the basement, and the way he's talking to her and stuff, it's so scary and unnerving. That really fleshed out the Charles Lee Ray character as a whole, where he's not just this random serial killer. It's not just like a version of the Zodiac killer or the guy from Dirty Harry, where he's just this violent guy. He's got this weird sense of morals and this obsessive compulsive and just sort of stalkerish aspect to him that really fleshes him out and makes him more of a full-rounded character, and it's more terrifying because of it.
And it doesn't negate much of, like, what we saw of even Chucky from this point on, where he's like, he's got the obsession with the kids. But also, I think this has one of the best examples in that sequence of an Easter egg that doesn't distract too much from the movie, where you're still in the middle of, like, all this chaos, and you're still, like, in the middle of, like, oh my god, this emotional tension. But he picks up that knife, and it's the exact knife from the first fucking movie with the weird, like, red thing on the side. That's, like, the perfect way to do a fucking Easter egg, which is, like, it's there, it's like, oh, it's that thing. Also, I'm still terrified by this knife that's about to stab this woman.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I thought that, too, when I first saw it. I was like, oh, that fucking goofy-looking knife. All right. Like, hell yeah. This movie sort of brought me back in and made me more of a fan of the Child's Play, at least the story Mancini's trying to tell with it, just for the ballsy nature of this as a whole. I mean, not only is it really well done, really well acted, great looking, beautiful locations and everything, but it's sort of the creator of the original and everything going back and be like, no, I can do it better. Here we go. And it's really fucking solid, dude.
Yeah, and even the reinvention of the fact that, like, Nika has a tragic ending with this movie, in a way where it's like how we kind of mentioned that was ignored in 3, which is like Andy gets shipped off to fucking prison. And this movie is just like, oh no, this is the first Child's Play movie where, like, Chucky totally wins in a way that really works for the series, which is like, oh my god, she's gonna, like, be locked into prison, no one believes her in the mental asylum, and he ends up getting shipped over to that little girl by Tiffany, Jennifer Tilly, who's always fun in these movies, and particularly in this one too. Just particularly the whole bit at the FedEx or whatever when they ship it off, and it's just like, my mother always said I couldn't put a price on love under $250, which is a great line. I love that.
Is it an animal? Is it a vegetable? Is it a... let's just go with other.
It's a really fun... Even shout out to, like, her first appearances for killing the cop in a very similar way to how the cop is killed in Bride of Chucky. Another great little Easter egg bit. But then, like, she ships off that thing, that Chucky, to that kid and her grandmother, who are implied to be killed horribly. And even we see the one killing. And then that fucking post-credit scene. Stellar. So good. We get Alex Vincent back. he's got a new package, and he's just like, I guess I'll just put this on the table. And Chucky gets the knife. He's just like, oh, he's gonna kill Andy, but nope, Andy's got that gun. Fuck you, kid. That alone was more satisfying to me than Jamie Lee Curtis being a similar character in Halloween 2018.
Oh, yeah, no, I definitely agree. Yeah, he puts a package on the table. He's talking to his mom. Yeah, I know it's my birthday. Don't get me anything. What are we having for dinner? Blah, blah. Yeah, Chucky's slowly cutting through the package. And, calms out. He's like, Andy, wait. Play with this motherfucker. And blows his brain. It's so good. It's so good, dude.
Criminal that the Netflix version cuts that end credit scene, because it's so good.
Do they? I didn't know that.
Yeah, on streaming versions, like when I shout out the sequels once again, like on Netflix, that's where they all watched them. Just like, you guys gotta watch this post-credit scene, though. It's really great.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, maybe because that's what makes it unrated.
I mean, that or Netflix is just like, whatever, fuck credits. We gotta watch something else now.
That's true. You liked this. How about watch this? My Hero Academia or whatever the fuck.
You like Anime Boy, Chucky. You can watch Anime Boys.
Right.
For sure. But Adam, we could talk for a while about Curse of Chucky, but let's go ahead and wrap up final thoughts. Your final thoughts on Curse of Chucky, and especially, we've been gushing praise. Is this maybe the best of the series?
Yeah, I think hands down it's the best of the series. I mean, there are contenders. I'd put 2 and Cult right up there, but this is the best of the series. Not only did it breathe new life completely into the franchise, it stripped it down to almost the bare bones of it, and it didn't reinvent the wheel, but man, did it polish it. I mean, this thing is just fucking a top-notch, solid slasher, psychological, almost a haunted house story from beginning to end. Great performances, great kills, great cinematography, everything. This movie pretty much works on every level.
And how weird is that, like, in a horror franchise, that, like, one of the direct-to-video sequels is the best one? Like, that almost never happens.
No, it doesn't happen. I mean, really, it doesn't.
Well, I think, to be fair, when we get to the double redo, I think you're going to point out one that...
there's one or two. I might point out two. But yeah, let's put it this way. It's extremely, insanely rare.
For sure. And I mean, I echo a lot of those sentiments. I think this is a great movie. I think it shows that, like, a concept like Chucky, which, despite the fact that, like, I know a lot of people where, like, I point out some of these serial killers, like, who's your favorite of, like, these 80s slashers, or at least who's the one that scares you? A lot of people say Chucky. And I think it's just more in the abstract, as opposed to, like, actually engaging with these movies as, like, a series. When you get to something like Curse, you can see that, like, a movie about a doll that kills people. You don't have to immediately dismiss that or make a bad version of it. You don't have to be a Charles Band and make 50 of those movies. Right. You can actually make, like, a really great, invested, engaging, like, series that tells an interesting, like, story all along the way, for the most part. And then when we get to Curse, it's just like, even when we're fucking 6 movies in, we can do something so spectacular and different in a way where it's like, it reinvents so much, and it just made me really respect this franchise even more, and Don Mancini particularly as a creator, to the point where, like, after this and Cult, which, if you see this and like this one, also watch Cult, because Cult is just like, okay, you guys, like, are settled in good with the, like, really solid version of Chucky killing a bunch of people in a small place. Here's the crazy version of that, where I'm going hog wild, doing weird shit, which teases the stuff for the new show, which... honestly, like, these 2 movies alone made me so excited for that show. I'm so happy it's happening. I am watching later on the day this episode's released, that fucking premiere, because I just want to see what the fuck is going to do with 8 episodes of television of this.
Yeah, I'm definitely curious, for sure.
But before we get into our next segment, here is a message from the ESO crew that we fully endorse.
Welcome to Dr. Geek's Laboratory.
Dr. Geek here with another reminder that the ESO Network is pro-science and pro-vaccine. We urge you to be a superhero and protect yourself, your family, and your fellow geeks around the world. Don't be fooled by the forces of evil and their anti-science misinformation campaign. Consult the latest CDC guidelines, your doctor, and get the COVID vaccine today.
So now we are doing our weekly segment, the Double Review, where every week, Adam and I talk about the best and worst possible double feature to go along with the particular topic of an episode. And keep in mind, when we do franchises like Child's Play, we open things up to include films that aren't just part of the franchise, but also kind of be inspired, like movies that influence the franchise from the past, or films from people that were involved in the movies or etc., stuff like that, for any, potential good or bad feature that we might talk about here. So Adam, you have 2 good and 2 bad choices you want to recommend and not recommend respectively. What are your choices?
Okay, so this was kind of a curious way to play this one. I wasn't sure if I should just do doll movies, how I should do it. So what I decided on, horror franchise that had direct to video sequels or soft reboots or things like that, and whether or not they were good or bad. So for my good ones, I have, which I'd argue is the best of the franchise, the only one kind of worth a damn in the franchise, is the Joe Lynch sequel to the original Wrong Turn 2, Dead End. It's a batshit crazy movie. It's pure camp violence. It's nutty. It makes that franchise more fun than it had any right to be. Instead of just being like a Hills Have Eyes ripoff, it's almost like Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 mixed with the Hills Have Eyes. Like, it's crazy shit. It's really fun, really solid, great Henry Rollins. It's a really, really wacky, fun movie that the franchise has never captured before or since. And then for the other one I have, which I absolutely also think is the best of the franchise, the very recent Leprechaun Returns, that I believe was released straight to Sci-Fi. It's a direct sequel to the first movie, and it fucking kind of slaps on all levels. It is a perfect sort of sequel soft reboot, much like I would say the Curse of Chucky was. The Leprechaun's actually kind of scary in it. It's not as crazy jokey. There are jokes in it, but the violence is really solid. Pretty good supporting cast to the chaos. I think it's just super, super fun, and maybe got sort of pushed away because of the Leprechaun Origins that came out before it, which is just atrocious. And for my bad, if you've listened to the show for long enough, you've probably sort of gleaned that I'm a big Barker fan. I big Hellraiser fan, things like that, which is very hard to do with the Hellraiser movies. But I like most of them for separate reasons. But the absolute bottom of the barrel, as far as I'm concerned, of direct-to-video sequels would be the Hellraiser Revelations that Dimension Extreme put out, and they had to push it out so they wouldn't lose the rights. It's insulting to fans of horror and Hellraiser fans in general. It is the worst Pinhead, the worst makeup effects, the worst visual effects, the worst cast, the worst story. There's incest. I believe the families are Barker and Craven, so just laziness on that aspect. It is just almost unwatchable unless you are curious about how to make a movie the worst possible way you can when there's already been bad ones before it. And then the other one I have, it reminds me of almost like the childhood whimsy of Child's Play, and maybe things that you loved as a kid coming back to try to hurt you or kill you. I have the Banana Splits movie. I was super kind of excited for this one because obviously it just looks like a Five Nights at Freddy's sort of deal, which I would say the Nick Cage movie that came out, Willy's Wonderland, is a very much more that than this one. That being said, this feels like a pale imitation of even that movie. Really ugly to look at. It's not shot well, and they're sort of pining for nostalgia for a property that nobody really gives a shit about, or maybe never has to that aspect. Like, I understand the Banana Splits were a thing at some point, but does anybody care? No, and it dives too hard into that. They're super fans of this franchise or this IP that don't exist, and it's just the kills are lazy, the gore's not even that good, characters are terrible, the acting's awful. It's a lousy movie.
Yeah, I have seen at least your 2 good ones, and I very much agree with Wrong Turn 2 is pretty stellar. I haven't seen the sequels that follow because I've heard such bad things, but even compared to the theatrical first Wrong Turn, it is like miles ahead. And there's a lot more stellar stuff, like fucking Henry Rollins showing up, or Patton Oswalt has a cameo vocally. Or even like the kills are pretty stellar in that one. I think, yeah, that one is a solid pick for sure, especially like some of the best direct-to-video sequels in general. And Leprechaun Returns is similar to that, even though it was like a Sci-Fi Channel original movie of sorts. It's definitely like miles ahead of the Leprechaun franchise, which ranges in the various entries from kind of enjoyably bad to abysmal. With some of those, like the only other one I would say is kind of fun is like 3. Where he's in Vegas.
So
that one's kind of fun.
I agree.
But otherwise, yeah, most of them are really fucking terrible. But Returns, yeah, is like so stellar. It's from the guys who did Psycho Gorman. they add that kind of similar sense of fun to that series. And shout out, they got fucking Francis back from the first movie.
Yep.
Francis came back. Hellraiser is one we've talked, like, off mic in particular about. Like, I have not seen most of those sequels. I have a feeling, given that Hulu movie is coming out next year, supposedly, with now Jamie Clayton, which some people are in a tizzy about, which I'm just like, what? Look, that's the most interesting thing, honestly.
100%.
Yeah, the trans woman is going to play Pinhead. That's miles different than, like, what I've heard with Revelations. I believe is the first one without Clive Barker, right? Who's the guy who plays Pinhead in the other movies?
Yeah, it's the first one without Doug Bradley or Clive Barker wanting to be attached as producer.
Well, I mean, even, yeah, because he, I guess, had like an executive producer credit on some of those bad ones, but even he was just like, I'm not bothering with that.
Just to tell you how bad this movie is, with Clive Barker produced things, there's been a lot of shit. Clive Barker's exact quote was, there's a movie coming out that said it's from the mind of Clive Barker. That's not true. It's not even from my asshole.
Yeah, I've heard very bad things about that one, where especially the guy's trying to do a Doug Bradley, but looks just kind of like puffy from what I've seen. Just looks really puffy. Whatever. We'll put a pin in Hellraiser, because I'm sure, given that movie's coming out on Hulu next year, that's probably the franchise we're doing in October next year, which will be interesting. I'm sure. Put a pin in that, everybody. But Banana Splits was also one, like, I'd heard about that. I'm like, well, this is a weird way of reprising something. Like, I vaguely recall, mostly because when I was a kid, Cartoon Network had this thing called Boomerang, where they would show old cartoons. And in this case, this old, like, kind of live action thing would just be like these interstitial skits that would happen between cartoons in the 70s, which is these guys in fucking suits, and we're turning that into a horror movie. That sounded kind of interesting, but I heard, like, oh, it's kind of like a disappointing bad movie. And especially, like, look, if you're gonna make any Hanna-Barbera thing into a horror property, there's an obvious answer: Funky Phantom.
Yeah, or that stupid shark.
His name is Jabberjaw. You respect his fucking name. You son of a bitch. You talk like Curly.
Yeah, he showed up at Space Jam 2, so there's interest.
Yeah, and no Funky Phantom, though. If you're unaware, by the way, Funky Phantom was like a Scooby-Doo ripoff show. Where it was like, Hanna-Barbera did like 15 of those shows where it's like, it's a bunch of kids and a blank. And in that case, it was like Baron Ghost of some sort who kind of talked like Paul Lynde, I believe, if I recall right. It's a very bad show.
Yep.
Those are all very interesting choices, Adam. But I've got mine here that I want to share. So for my two goods, I think with my picks in general, by the way, I kind of did half of what you did, but also have like sort of like little thing attacking movies, basically. Because I do have a really good direct-to-video sequel amongst my picks. I'll go ahead and start off with that. One of my goods, my first good, is Phantasm 3, which, you don't know, Phantasm is a pretty fun franchise from Don Coscarelli. The first movie is one of the most interesting surreal indie movies to come out of the 70s. 2 is like a fun, big-budget theatrical sequel that kind of failed. And then 3, it's not better than either of those two, but it's a really solid entry in that franchise. It has that same kind of surreal visuals. Angus Scrimm is very fun. And they introduced a new character. I apologize, I forgot her name, but this like black lady who has like nunchucks, who's dope. And I was just like, why wasn't she in more of these fucking movies? She's great. I love seeing her kick ass against the tall man. It's definitely, of the, like, that series went direct to video, and the ones afterward are very bad. But I think 3 is one that gets kind of dismissed amongst like people who have even heard of the Phantasm movies. And 3 is a really stellar one. I would say anybody who's curious about those movies, watch the first 3. They are quite fun. And I think, especially even with a direct-to-video movie, that one still fits as a worthy sequel, which is also very rare, if nothing else, for direct-to-video horror sequels. But then the other sort of like doll of some sort that's attacking, in this case, it's a very unique version of that. I have a movie from 1978, but it's a pretty stellar one called Magic, which stars a young Anthony Hopkins. Weird thing to picture. It's very just disorienting when you watch that movie. Just like, oh my god, he was young at a certain point? He looked like middle-aged as opposed to old as fuck, but he was young at that time. And he plays a ventriloquist who is basically under the influence of his dummy called Fats. And that movie is a stellar example of like, the Fats isn't actually like alive, but the Fats sort of like personality is influencing Anthony Hopkins' character in a way that's like a really good psychological drama that becomes like a horror thriller kind of concept as it goes along, and it's really well done. It's directed by Richard Attenborough. Yes, the guy from Jurassic Park who also made Gandhi right after this, won an Oscar for directing Gandhi, made this movie beforehand. And it's a spectacular little movie that I think has kind of gotten lost a bit to time, but it's really stellar. And also, look up the teaser trailer for this movie. It's unnerving. Like, if I was a little kid and I saw that in like 1978, I would be mortified. But yeah, really stellar, underrated of like these sort of like killer or evil doll movie. And then for my bad, I have one is a killer doll movie that came out earlier this year. I give a lot of credit to the guy who stars in this, also wrote and directed and produced it, and it's a very low budget production, but it doesn't look that bad. It's Benny Loves You. I give him a lot of credit for managing to make the small movie, and it doesn't look like a terrible movie at all. But it's a pretty unfunny horror comedy, basically about this guy who works for a toy company, and he's kind of like this loser schlub who like lives with his parents but also doesn't have any adult agency of his own, and it just feels like he's like Arrested Development stuck as a kid, even though he's like 35, and then his parents die, and he ends up reorganize the house and make like actually live on his own. But his stuffed animal, who they say is a bear but it looks like a rabbit, it clearly looks like a fucking rabbit, ends up coming to life and basically killing for him. And I just thought it was a pretty unfunny horror comedy, despite looking pretty solid for a small budget. On just its surface, it is still just like a movie with like a bunch of characters I don't really give a shit about, and not that many like interesting kills or laughs in particular. It is pretty much a dead zone for me in terms of laughs that I was not a huge fan of. And speaking of that, I have another horror comedy. This one doesn't star a doll. It stars at least some very funny people involved with this little sort of tumor monster in Bad Milo, which was a movie I'm sure most of you aren't aware of. But basically, it is about this guy played by Ken Marino, who's a very funny guy. And there are a lot of funny people in this movie. But basically, he gets these like uncomfortable pains like in his intestines area. And as it turns out, there's like a demon made out of intestines living in his butt. And you figure, oh, is that going to be the only joke of the movie? Yes, it is. It's a bummer. But yeah, there are a lot of really funny people in Bad Milo, with like not just Ken Marino as the star, but also like Jillian Jacobs from Community, who I love, Stephen Root, who we love on here. We just talked about him last week. Pedro Stormare, Patrick Warburton, Kumail Nanjiani. A lot of funny people in that movie, but unfortunately, it just does not give anything for all those talented people to do whatsoever. It's a really a huge dearth of laughs for me.
I've seen You're Too Good. I absolutely love Magic. I think Magic is really solid psychological sort of horror piece. Anthony Hopkins is great, and that dummy is fucking scary. And that trailer alone is just, it's incredible. And Phantasm 3, dude, the thing is, like, before I saw that movie, because I didn't see it for a long, long time. I'd seen the first one and the second one, and then I just never kind of went back to the franchise until Angus Scrimm passed away. And I went back and rewatched them all. How did that chick with the nunchucks not come up in any more movies? I mean, she's nunchucking the phantasm balls out of the sky. She was really predominantly featured in the trailer, and I just thought she was so cool with like the red bandana headband and all that shit. And yeah, I absolutely love that character.
By the way, the actress who I forgot to mention, Gloria Lynn Henry as Rocky, is that character.
Yeah,
fuck
she's
yeah,
awesome.
She's so good.
And I didn't mind the recasting in part 2. It was fine to me. I actually kind of preferred him as an actor, but whatever. They brought everyone back for the third one, and it just sort of stayed the original cast till the end. Which again, 4 is okay. Don't watch Ravager. It's just ultimately depressing. And then I've heard nothing good about Bad Milo. I almost watched it a couple times because of that cast, but I just never pulled the trigger on it. And now I'm really glad I didn't. And also for the Benny Loves You one, I was actually kind of surprised that you picked it, just because we've had a friend of the show sort of recommend it a couple times and to kind of sing its praises a little bit. So I'm actually kind of surprised that you didn't like it so much, but I really trust your opinion when it comes to that stuff, because we're pretty similar when it comes to taste, at least in horror. So I will definitely avoid that one as well.
I mean, yeah, I'm a bit more on an island with Benny Loves You. I've heard a lot of people praise it. I don't necessarily dissuade anybody from watching it. It's not like the worst. It's a much better movie than I would say Bad Milo is, for example. But it's like I said, very impressive that it was made on like the low budget that it was. But I still was just like not huge into it. But different strokes for different folks, especially with both horror and comedy, are very subjective compared to others.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely,
for sure. But yeah, those are our double redo picks. Please send your own on that. And we'll go ahead and repeat our titles, by the way, real quick here, to make sure you all get them. My good picks were Magic from 1978 and Phantasm 3. And then my bad picks were Bad Milo and Benny Loves You.
And my good picks were Leprechaun Returns and Wrong Turn 2, Dead End. And my bad picks were Hellraiser Revelations and the Banana Splits movie.
By the way, that was Phantasm 3, Lord of the Dead. That's what the
Yeah, come on, man.
subtitle.
Get your shit together.
Oh, I'm such a fake Phantasm girl. I'm sorry. Ooh. All the Don Casarelli boys are going to beat me up. But thank you all for listening to us do that redo. And we also want to thank some other people here. We want to thank Chris Oliver, who does the intro and outro music for our show. Listen to more of his music at chrisoliver.bandcamp.com. Thanks to Christian Thor Lally for our artwork. Follow him at Night of Water. That's night with a K _of_water. For more of his great stuff, there will be a link tree where you can see a bunch of his places where he has art available. And also thanks to our patrons, patreon.com/DEDBpod, where for a $1 a month, you get a lot of stuff, I would argue. You get a bang for your single buck, I would say, where we put out polls where you guys get to pick either movies or topics we cover for the show, and also a bunch of bonus audio. Like coming up, I think around the time this is posted up, there will be a new On the Edge of Relevance where we talk about very new releases and spoilery detail with a demarcation point. We'll be talking about the latest James Bond film, No Time to Die, which as of this recording, neither of us have seen. But I've heard some interesting things. I'm very curious to see that, and especially see where Adam lies on that, because he's not as big on most of the Daniel Craig films, as we talked about in our James Bond episode.
Yeah, I can't wait for all 6 hours of that, or however fucking long it is.
Yeah, 2 hours, 43 minutes. I got to carve out a decent amount of my weekend to see that, Bubby. But along with that, coming up later in the month, we love doing at least one big bonus episode every month, where we, do sometimes an audio commentary, sometimes we do like a big March Madness thing we've done in the past, but this time we're doing a top 10 list. And oh boy, Adam, this is going to be one that's tough for us to narrow down, because we're doing our top 10 horror movie deaths. So not just kills, but any kind of like big dramatic death sequence as well in a horror movie. We've been trying to narrow that down so we can record the episode, and it has been rough for these two horror-loving boys.
It's been insanely difficult. Insanely difficult. But I'm also very, very excited to get into it and sort of see where we lay, if we have similar ones or not.
But we also want to recommend, if you want to find us on social medias, please follow us on Twitter and Facebook at DEDBpod, where we post a bunch of fun stuff. Every day I try and post something like fun about the movies that we've covered on this particular week's episode, like videos and behind the scenes trivia, whatever I can find. And also, you can email us feedback, doubleedgedoublebill@gmail.com, all spelled out. We'll most likely read it on the show here. And if you can't support us on the Patreon for the $1 a month, that's cool. You can help us out with at least a one-time purchase of some merchandise of ours. It's over on the TeePublic store for the ESO network. There'll be a link in the description for that, where you can buy a t-shirt, or you can buy a mug, or you can buy all sorts of apparel with our wonderful logo on it. It helps out because we get a bit of a kickback from that. That helps out the show, Adam. So what should they do exactly?
To impersonate you. Buy our merch! Buy our merch!
Oh yeah, that's the Adam Thomas doll with all sorts of catchphrases, mostly to encourage you to buy more merchandise after you've bought the Adam Thomas doll.
Yeah, that's all he wants. That's a very soulless company.
The most transparent company, just like, buy more of our products!
Yeah. Buy 8 of these! Buy them all!
You see this shelf I'm on? Buy all my friends!
Buy the shelf! Fuck it!
Oh, yes. And for more of our silly antics individually, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd at NotTheWho'sTommy, where I post plenty of fun things on my own. Also, I do some writing at both marianithomas.wordpress.com and film-cred.com.
You can find me on Twitter or Instagram at atom_adam. That's ATOM_OR_ADAM. And you can also find me on Letterboxd at Schwanson. That's SCHWANDTSON, son.
Yes, and for more of our audio antics, Subscribe to us on places like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and other podcasting platforms. If you're listening on ESO, why not listen to all the other great shows on the network? And you can also dig into our archives on our Podbean main feed, where we posted several episodes even before we joined ESO. So many episodes, and we're at 178. It's crazy. That many fucking episodes. It's been a lot, and we'll keep doing them. But it would help us out if you can't buy the merch, or if you can't support us on the Patreon for the $1. Totally cool. I understand money can be tight, but it would also help us out if you really like the show, or you really just want to share it around, just to really like, hey, this is a fun podcast to listen to distract you from whatever's going on in your life. Please just rate, review, or share the show around. That helps us out. That gets us more visibility. That gets more people to enjoy our back and forth here.
It is everywhere you fuckers might be on the internet. So there is severely a problem with the lack of love. And I am against it. I am enraged. And I want to picket.
You want to picket people not sharing this show?
Yep. I'm just going to walk around in my driveway in my underwear and just with a picket sign that says, you fuckers. And that's it.
I'm sure they'll really get the message across. And really the most important cause to be picketing right now, of all the causes to picket for in our world right now, it really is Adam being upset that you don't share the show clearly.
What else is there to picket? What's
going
on?
Nothing bad's happening. Everything's great. We're fine. We're fine. How are you?
Yeah.
But Adam, enough of that silliness. We gotta do our picking for next week like we do at the end of every show. Basically, Adam and I usually each have 2 movies of different quality. We switch up on good and bad quality. In the case of next episode, Adam has 2 good ones, I have 2 bad ones. And we assign each our choices a number between 1 and 10. And the other person usually picks a number between 1 and 10. Whatever that's closest to of the 2 choices ends up getting us our good and our bad feature. Unless someone implements the Godfather rule. Yes. We have this in our back pockets until May of next year, which will be our upcoming anniversary. Adam and I each have a little veto in our pocket. So if we pick a number between 1 and 10 from the other person's choices, and they say, hey, we're going to do X movie, that person will say, like, well, Adam, do you want to take the cannoli? And at that point, Adam can either say, yes, I want to take the cannoli, or no, I won't take the cannoli. We can only do that once in the next several months, so it's an important thing to implement whenever we truly don't want to cover either a good or a bad pick. But let's see if that happens with our picking for next week. We like covering, some kind of horror icon every October, some sort of person that is really representative of the genre. And this time, instead of doing an actor, we're doing an actress, and one who I feel is a great cheerleader for the genre. Adam, who are we talking about?
We're talking about the lovely, the wonderful, the versatile, the getting better and better as she goes, Barbara Crampton.
Hell yeah, Barbara Crampton, Babs, our favorite. We're not friends with her, but we'll call her Babs. If you please be friends with us, Barbara. You seem like a very nice person in interviews and like podcasts I've heard you on.
Yeah, she seems fucking cool as shit, dude. Like, yeah, I want to be friends with her. I'd like to call her up, be like, Babs, how do I balance my checkbook?
Can you also tie this in somehow to Reanimator so I can understand it?
Yes, 100%. Explain it to me.
Yeah, so we've covered a couple movies of hers on the show, like Castle Freak and From Beyond. She's worked with Stuart Gordon, the late great, quite a bit. But you have the 2 good picks, potentially, for Adam. I have the 2 bad ones. So this will be very interesting here. For your 2 good ones, though, I'm going to pick number 6.
Alrighty, at number 7, I have a movie that was released this year to actually a lot bigger fanfare than usual for lightly released, but almost like a Shudder movie. I have Jacob's Wife.
Oh, yes, the one with her and Larry Feston. It's kind of like a vampire movie, from what I understand. I've heard very good things. Yeah, you know what? I'm not going to veto that because I haven't seen it yet. I have a Shudder subscription, so I'm like, why not? That'll be a very interesting choice. I'm very curious to watch it. But Adam, what was your alternative choice? At what number?
My alternative choice at number 1, which actually is celebrating its 10-year anniversary today. I have Adam Wingard's You're Next.
Oh, You're Next is great. I wouldn't have minded covering You're Next. That's a great fucking movie. She's very good in it as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Well, Adam, she's done a lot of like sort of smaller horror movies. There's a lot of potentially awful ones we could get here, Adam. But For my two bad choices, please pick a number between 1 and 10.
I'm going to go straight up number 10.
Okay. At number 8, had a movie that I have heard at least very mixed things on. This isn't one of the ones where I've heard this is the worst piece of shit ever. I've heard very mixed, interesting reception, and I was kind of curious because it had a really dope poster, an interesting kind of premise to it. I have, from 2016, Beyond the Gates.
Okay, cool. I haven't seen this one either. It's one that I've always kind of want to check out because of the poster, believe it or not. So yeah, I'm down for that, and I am not taking the cannoli.
Well, yes, Adam, I'm sure you're very happy about that, because over at number 2 on the opposite side of things, I had a movie that I've heard is quite infamously terrible amongst horror fans, that has a lot of famous horror icons in it. I had Death House from 2017.
Ooh. Yeah, that might have been a cannoli on that one. No, that would have been 100%. I'm not rewatching that movie.
Damn it. That could have had you use that. Damn it. If only that had been the opposite spot. But yeah, I mean, to be fair, I've heard such dire things about that one. So stay tuned for next time where we'll be covering Beyond the Gates and Jacob's Wife, two very recent films, especially for someone who's been involved in the horror genre since the 80s. She works a lot, so we'll be talking all about her in those two films next time. But until then, Adam, wanna play?
I'm gonna answer you in a whisper.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.